is, you know, one of the questions we all get is, how did you get into Occupy? How did you become part of this? So I think I'll just maybe just give you a brief introduction to me. I ended up getting a job in a place called Moorgate that I didn't really know much about, and soon realised that I was working in the city. I did that for about 3 years. I was looking after international listed companies, people like Occidental and Zarco and Usinor Sassalor and Texas Instruments and some of these huge American companies, and we were helping them with investor relations. And so yes, I actually do have some understanding of how the city works and what goes on and the various agendas that govern the city.
My background, actually similar to Tom in a way, is I'm a private investor. So I was investing, trading stocks and shares on the stock exchange. Some people thought it was very strange that someone who made their living on the London Stock Exchange would be a member of Occupy. What I found was being a part of it and seeing how the system worked really opened my eyes to what was wrong with it. And though it's certainly true that in the current system, if you're very good, you can make a lot of money, I also noticed that people who were in that elite managerial class who weren't very good were also making a lot of money. And that didn't seem to be right to me. I'd buy shares in companies that would do quite badly, the dividends wouldn't go up, and then the managers would still get a lot of money, and would still get their bonuses, and I started to question why that was happening. In extreme cases, someone would really do damage to a company, would get sacked, and then they'd get an enormous payoff, and they'd be paid to leave the company, which seemed even worse. And then also during this boom time in the 1990s, the year 2000s, there was still very high unemployment. So that was also wrong. It's like, well, why isn't the wealth filtering to everyone? Why is there still this underclass that's struggling? Then, of course, in 2007, 2008, we had the financial crisis, and it was obvious that capitalism was out of control, and all this wealth that was being created wasn't for the general good at all. It was just for a certain very elite class. And not only were they making a lot of money for themselves, they were making decisions that were very short-term in nature, making decisions that were basically going to make money in the short term for themselves, get big bonuses, but it was going to sink the company in a few years' time and actually sink the whole economy, as it turned out. So it was obvious that something was very wrong, but the politicians didn't seem to be acting on it. And we've got a political system which is set up to return two same parties all the time, and those parties are the same. And people are becoming increasingly disillusioned with politics, they're becoming disillusioned with politicians. And we've got this incredible situation, which I think is incredible, that we've got leaders who we dislike, and in some cases actually hate. And we kind of take it for granted now, but I think it's extraordinary. I mean, the people that lead us should be people that we respect, that we look up to, that are wise, that we think can lead us to a greater existence. And in fact, we despise them. And that's manifested in ever lower turnout at elections. But then you think about protesting. Protesting doesn't seem to make any difference. 2 million people went on the anti-Iraq war march. The Iraq war still happened. Students protested against increased tuition fees. Tuition fees still went up. The countryside march against the ban on fox hunting. Fox hunting was still banned. So protesting, although it's allowed in this freedom of speech democracy that we have, doesn't make any difference. And I became as disillusioned as everyone else. And then Occupy came along. And suddenly you've got a protest movement which is sitting there. It's basically saying we're not going to go away until things change. And suddenly for the first time I thought, here's something which can make a difference. And that was why I joined Occupy.
That I have found when I've been doing my outreach, talking to people, is that actually they find it a lot of the time very difficult to understand what is happening. There is a language that sort of mystifies what happens in the city. I work there and I know that it's complicated enough when you're there, let alone when I came out of the city and I started to explain to people that actually, well, for example, let's look at what the credit crunch is. Let's think about how this sort of thing happens. And you have to sort of picture, for example, a roulette table. All the people around the table are playing a slightly different game of roulette. Basically what that means is that when you put your money down and you don't win, instead of you losing what you put down, you lose the total amount of everything at the table. This is derivative trading, this is margin trading, this is where you can lose way more than your original bet. You have everybody around the table doing that, and then what happens? One of them runs out of money. So they turn to the guy sitting next to them and say, I need to stay at the table. I can't leave the table, I'm sitting on too many losses, could you give me some more money? So they do that, and they all start lending each other money, and then when they stop lending each other money, they turn to the people behind them and say, could you lend me some money? And eventually this just carries on until one day, the person at the table talks to the person behind, says, have you got any money? He says, no. And then that person turns to the person behind him, and they haven't got any money either. Nobody can lend to anyone anymore. That's a credit card. That's what happens. A lot of what this is about bringing the issues of inequality and explaining perhaps why those issues are unlikely to go away without change. And it's about saying, this is what we're thinking about. Do you believe that there is inequality in life? Do you think it's going to get better on its own? Do you think the current form of capitalism is likely to resolve those issues? Or do you feel there's something that we can do? A change in how we are structured, a change in how government operates in its relationship with business and with the people. And through that sort of discussion, then actually, by bringing those ideas out and people joining together to discover what those answers are, then behaviour changes come from society. At the end of the day, society defines society. So, you know, the fact is, we're talking about a crime. And actually, you know, when it comes to what the banks were doing, if you are trading insolvently, I ran a company, I'm pretty sure when I was doing that, that was illegal. If I write a check, that's fraud. Now, they either knew that they were insolvent, which is fraud, or they didn't know, and that's negligence. Somewhere along the line, you know, there is fault and there is crime, and I actually think that at some point some people will go to jail, because I'm pretty sure that when you look at what happened in the riots last year, yeah, that was a crime, but they're doing the time. Somebody went to jail for 4 years for sending an email to someone saying, let's riot. Yeah, that was illegal. That was a crime, and they're doing it. No bankers are in jail this year. So really, it's about looking at all these issues, seeing how they are affecting us now, what's likely to happen, and instead of seeing it and not changing things, we prefer to see the iceberg and decide to go around it. That's what we're talking about.
On the protest side, obviously just being a camp was a thorn in the side of the authorities. Just being there, just its existence, applied constant pressure on the authorities and made them realise the sort of changes that we wanted to make. But we were also a hub for organising other protests. So, for example, on November the 30th, there was a march, I think, against pension cuts, and Occupy was heavily involved in that. And we did lots of other protests and marches, and it became a hub for lots of different activities in that way. It was also a centre for education. One of the things that's happened in our current system is that a lot of the general public have become very disengaged from politics, from economics, and they don't really understand what's gone wrong. They know that things are wrong, but they don't know what. So a large part of the Occupy movement is about education, and about involving people and getting people to find their voice and work out solutions. We don't know what the key points are, which is why we're pushing everywhere. It's a bit like kicking on a rotten door. You don't know which particular kick is going to be the one that makes the door cave in. So you just basically keep kicking until it caves in. People join Occupy with lots of different agendas, with lots of different experiences, with lots of different views as to how we should change things. Everybody does their own bit, everybody does what inspires them. Some people focus on the financial system, some people focus on the lack of democracy, other people go off and try and set up little, groups which are going to do peer-to-peer lending, whatever. Everybody does their own thing. Nobody knows which is going to be the tipping point. Nobody knows which of those initiatives are going to flower and blossom into something amazing and change the whole of society, and which ones will just wither and die. So we do all of it. So the answer to the question is I don't know, but it's a very positive don't know, because I'm pretty sure that it will happen. It's just a matter of letting things take their course and waiting for it to do exactly that.
Yeah. Okay, my name is Stephen Malindra, and I'm a journalist with the radio station called Voice of Africa Radio. Now, there are two questions that I have here. How are you going to change, or how is your organization going to run without proper leadership? The second question is to do with the how are you going to change people's minds, or how are you going to change the top when you haven't involved the people at the top?
I would have no problem with engaging with some of the people you talk about. It would be very nice if some of those people wanted to engage with us, and that doesn't always happen. Leadership. Well, I mean, this is one of the sort of structure questions, really. I mean, the one thing I would say is it does allow for a certain level of independence and freedom of speech, and democratic participation that is to be favoured. If we're talking about changes to a system that enhances democracy, then obviously we need to be as democratic as we can ourselves. Yeah, did you want to say anything on that?
Yes, you can I just say very briefly? I just say I think it's a bit of a simplification to assume that everyone who's doing very well out of the system is against us, and everyone who's suffering under the system is for us. My own stepfather, for example, who's definitely not got any money, is actually against Occupy, for whatever reasons, and I've had all sorts of debates with him. I also know people who are very well off, who are the real captains of industry, who support Occupy. It's not actually that simple. A lot of the time the people who are at the top who aren't coming out in favour of Occupy would do if there was critical mass, but they're sort of sitting on their hands at the moment thinking, well, I'm going to wait and see what happens. So it's just to back up what Tom said, basically. You need to engage with everyone, and at some point there will be that tipping point, and that's what we're aiming for.
And if I have to work my fingers to the bone, we will rise, rise again. And if we have to build a castle of our own, we will rise, rise again.